I don't remember much about that day, except for the distinct smell of the Blair Music Building at Lebanon Valley College. It wasn't a bad smell. It wasn't necessarily a good smell either, but no place in the world smelled like the Blair Music Building. Every time I entered this building to this day, I can still feel myself get a little nervous. As that scent hits my nose, it takes back so many recitals. It takes me back to so many classes, so many memories, so many students. But this particular day, there really wasn't much remarkable, not much to remember. All except for one simple 8.5 by 11, black and white piece of paper posted just outside of my teaching studio. My office resides in the basement of that Blair Music Building, just outside several bulletin boards. One that posted job opportunities for church musicians. I glanced at them on occasion, but never really took note of anything serious until this day. The word Elizabethtown caught my attention. You see, this was my very first semester teaching as an adjunct professor at Lebanon Valley, and as an adjunct professor, I was open to the idea of exploring different employment and some additional employment. And when I saw that a church in Elizabethtown, my hometown, was looking for a director of music ministries, I thought to myself, well, this sounds intriguing. There were actually 4 positions the church was hiring for at the time. It was the adult choir director, who would also serve as the overall director of music ministries, a bell choir director, and then a youth music director, as well as a children's music director. At that point, I hadn't had much experience with church music at all, but I did have a lot of teaching experience and certainly experience in music, so I thought to myself, well, why not give a call and check it out? So a couple hours later that day, I had a break from teaching. I found my old Sprint flip phone, and I dialed 367-1000. A friendly voice answered the phone. That friendly voice, her name was Judy. I mentioned that I was an adjunct professor at Lebanon Valley, and I saw that there was a job opening for a church musician, and I was inquiring to see if any of the positions were still open. She responded with a resounding, well, yes. I told her that I lived in Elizabethtown, and she invited me to stop over and check out the church. And in fact, the chair of that search committee happened to be her husband, Ray Powell. We met that very evening. Within the first couple minutes, I think we were both surprised to find out how many mutual people we knew. I had attended Elizabethtown area high school. Judy asked me if I knew the Houth family, Bob Houth, to which I chuckled and said, well, actually, his daughter Beth and I went to the senior prom together. Little did I know the entire course of my life would be changed that day. Both Ray and Judy were supportive of me right from the start. Initially, a little bit of trivia, I had only planned to apply for youth music director here. That was the only position that I actually started the application process for. And Ray had actually encouraged me, if I had interest and was open to the idea of applying for the overall music director position. The only thing that was already filled at that time was the bell choir director position, which was, I was really happy to hear that because I didn't know anything about bells. And they told me they had found a really exceptional qualified candidate, this guy named Ron Bellamy. Okay. So after a whirlwind of visits, interviews, board meetings, and eventually a council vote, I was hired as director of music ministries. I began work on August 1st, 2006, 2 weeks after returning from my honeymoon. 2 others started work here that very same day. This renowned bell choir director, and a young man in his first senior pastor position, Greg Lazakovitz. The rest, we could say, was history. Several years later, I was called by the ministry calling committee here to consider a call into pastoral ministry. Soon after I began seminary and started serving the congregation as both director of music ministries and ministry intern. During this time, I was given the opportunity to experience in all aspects of pastoral ministry: preaching, pastoral care, administration, youth ministry, worship planning, design, and eventually things like concert planning and certainly audio and visual production for churches. You all, the Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren, were with me through all the major events of my life in the last 17 years. My graduation from Lebanon Valley with my master's in business administration, my getting licensed into ministry within the Church of the Brethren, my first sermon, my first child dedication, the birth of our 2 children, our performance of Rhapsody in Blue with the Hershey Symphony Orchestra, various concerts and worship services where Elizabeth and I participated for the denomination, from my graduation from seminary, and finally seeking ordination and everything else in between. To think about my life outside of the Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren feels nearly impossible. But, as you said, Jeff, for everything there is a season, and the season has come where I must go where I feel God calling. And even though my calling is taking me out of this church and out of this denomination, there will always be a big part of me, a part of you that I take with me. And I could not be more proud of that. Your spirit, your love, your teaching, your examples of faith and action have forever impacted who I am and who I will be as a pastor and as a person. My colleagues with whom I've had the honor to work with, John David, Greg, Pam, Jason, you all have provided excellent examples of ministry at its finest. And you all are some of the finest people I know. While I really don't know for sure if I have what it takes for the challenges ahead, if I'm up for this call, I do know for sure that you all have fully lived into your identity as a teaching congregation, and the lessons and gifts that I learned will help serve many others. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Our scripture from Exodus. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho, and the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain, that is, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zor. The Lord said to him, this is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over. Friends, we have traveled a long road together. And like Moses, while I won't be continuing with you, there is much on the horizon for you as a congregation that I am excited about. I am excited to see what God has in store for the Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren. Now, it seems common that when a pastor's leaving, for the pastor to leave some words of wisdom to the congregation. For me, I'm not really going to do that. I feel called instead to share the biggest lessons that you taught me through my time here. The first is the power of community. And while we refer to this a lot, and it may seem obvious, I never really realized the amazing power in a faith community until I was part of this one. Through good times and bad, you were there for Elizabeth and I, for my family. There were times that I don't really know what I would have done without you. God working in community, in this community, is nothing short of miraculous. When I first started doing pastoral care visits, I have to admit, I just felt a little bit awkward about it. Pastor Pam, who was a great encourager, she provided names and addresses of some congregation members that I was to visit for various reasons, and I didn't know how to feel about it. At the time, I never met any of them before, and I was just worried it would be weird, or maybe they just think I was there because it was my job to be there. But time and again, I saw the immense power. I experienced immense power in these connections. Having human connection is an essential human need, and connecting with some awesome folks of all generations in that way was not only what I hope was enjoyable to them, but incredibly enriching for me. From Bud Weaver, I learned all about his time singing in the musical group The Wilburbuds. From Otis Kitchen, we would discuss life and have some deep philosophical conversations about what it was like being a musician in the church. And dear Miriam O'Donnell, what fun it was to walk down to visit with Miriam. We'd talk for a bit, her cat would be running around, and eventually we would sit at her slightly out-of-tune piano, and she would sing famous standards like Misty and Stardust while I would play. These connections and relationships were ones I will never forget. And I can say that we far underestimate the power of loneliness that folks experience. There is loneliness in our world and in our community, especially in this post-COVID world. And there is so much power in just a short visit or a phone call. It can make such an impact in someone's life. God works through community, and through community we can see our biggest impact. And as a community, we've been through a lot lately. Stating the obvious elephant in the room, it's been a rough couple years for the church. We've endured a global pandemic. We've seen the effects of a large, aging building, and we've seen a building project unfold in ways that we didn't initially think. Our in-person attendance is still averaging around half of what it did before the pandemic. And between Greg, Eric, and I, you have three pastors making pastoral transitions within just about 1 year's time. A challenging year indeed. But as you've heard several times, I invite you to take a breath. I invite us all to take a breath. And now I invite us to look around. Look around the room. This community, while it may look different than it did before, is still here. This community is still the body of Christ. And the fact that we look different, maybe we are different now, isn't a bad thing. In fact, it's a beautiful thing, because transformation is a part of where God calls us. Since the time of Acts, the church has changed and evolved, and it will continue to do so to meet the needs of the time. But God's love is timeless, and we experience this love most in community. Lesson number 2. What we do matters to future generations. I've been blessed to be here long enough to see those who started in my children's choirs grow up and start families of their own. It's wonderful. I think back when we talk about first, one of my very first memories that I have of the church was with the youth choir. The church picnic, I was hired in August. The church picnic, I think, was late August, early September. And at the time, someone thought it would be an awesome idea for the youth to provide music for the picnic. And I thought, that sounds good. So we had a huge youth choir at the time, and we had a group that just came back from NYC. So we had some NYC music that everybody knew, and a lot of different various talents that the kids had. I remember Connor Mahan was really excited to be able to play maybe about 6 bars of a Star Wars song on his trombone. It was awesome. So we kind of did it almost like talent show style, where we let really any of the youth who wanted to play some music do something, and then we would come together at the end and put the whole group together to do the theme for NYC that year. It was awesome. It was great. The community was really supportive. The kids were super into it. But I remember that at the time, Sam Hockley, he had a song that he wanted to sing, and he could play it on the piano, but the thing was he couldn't play it in the key that he sang the song. So he asked, does this keyboard have one of those transpose buttons where you could set it to a different key just because it would better suit my voice? And I said, sure, we can do that. So I reset the key off, and for those of you who aren't familiar with music, it's kind of important to be in the right, for everybody to be in the right key, be on the same page, so to speak. So he did this song. I set the keyboard down. He sat down and played it. It was awesome. He did a great job. And then we invited everyone up with their instruments to play this NYC song. I think you see where this is going. In my excitement, I had forgotten to reset the key on the keyboard. And we started, and it started with me at the piano. So far, I'm thinking this is going well. Kids are into it, they're bopping along. And then we had, I think, I tried to be creative in having everyone use their whatever instrument they had. So we had, I think, a violin, a trombone, a trumpet, maybe a saxophone, that were going to come in with like a part. And it was right when they came in and I was playing that I realized, okay, I see what's going on here, because clearly this did not sound good at all. But it was too late. We were into it. We did the whole song with the piano, I think maybe 3 keys completely off. And again, this was my first experience providing music with our youth group for you all. And I just remember how supportive everyone was. And everyone was kind of like, I don't think this is supposed to sound this way, but isn't it nice to see all the youth participating? So, like I said, what we do matters to future generations. And I've seen that play out. And I know that not all of us are parents, but we all do have an impact on the future generations. Those who practice loving God and loving neighbor influence next generations to also love God and neighbor. Those who seek out and care for the least among us influence others to do the same. Those who value church and show commitment to church influence future generations to do the same. What we do matters. What we do matters infinitely more than what we say. Lesson 3. While there's much diversity in God's kingdom, and certainly here in this community, we are more alike than we are different. Now, I have to premise this next story saying that you all, I think beyond any congregation, have come a long way when it comes to wideness and breadth of musical experience and musical integrating into the God experience in worship. Like, I think back to when Zane Akers and I played a piece that we entitled Interstate to Gehenna on organ and electric guitar, which had a little AC/DC vibe going on, and everything else in between. And I think, wow, y'all are pretty cool. However, this diversity wasn't always present. So when I was hired as a director of music ministries, I had a lot of experience, certainly as a musician, but I had little experience as a church musician. So coming in as the slightly naive, wide-eyed optimist that I still am, I thought, cool, church music. As long as it's about God and Jesus, we could do it in church, right? How quickly I learned this was not the case. As someone who loves all types of music, from classical concertos to rock and roll, I just thought church music was church music. But I learned how wrong this was. Apparently, there are specific categories of church music, even under this church music umbrella. And I guess an unspoken rule was that if you liked one, you couldn't like another. For example, like, if you liked contemporary Christian music, that had to stand in opposition to traditional hymnody. Or even it's extended to instrumentation too. If you liked organ music, you couldn't like drums and electric guitars. Or the instrument of a cappella congregational singing, which was a big part of the Brethren tradition. But unlike the secular world, where it really is just a matter of preference, liking one over the other, in the strange new world I was navigating of church music, it wasn't just about preference. It was about what was ethically right and wrong. It was about worshiping God in the proper, appropriate ways in the house of the Lord. Music became a dividing line both stylistically and theologically. It was all just so complex. On the surface, there appeared to be these clear rules to follow. I tried to figure it out. For example, in a more progressive setting, you were supposed to, I learned this early, you had to avoid music that referred to God with masculine pronouns. Okay, you can do that. And we had to avoid any of the songs that the pastors called bloody, where they used a lot of blood language, because theologically that didn't fully align with where the congregation was. So, okay, there's two rules that I can easily follow. But see, the problem was it wasn't that simple, because that equation didn't seem to apply to a lot of those traditional hymns that are in the hymnal that the congregation loved to sing. It was like this complex English language rule of I before E except after C, except for the 1,000 exceptions to the rule. It took a while to figure it all out. But like I said, we've come a long way. And your identity as an inclusive church has certainly trickled down to all forms of musical expression, because in the end, it is what connects us with God. And while we understand that while we may not connect with a particular piece of music, the person sitting to our left or our right may. And music's a fun area to pick on in this, but at the end of the day, we are much more alike than we are different. And it is my hope that you all continue to see diversity as a strength as you move on. And I would also love to see you move from a very open culture to a very invitational culture. Friends, as I'm about to embark on a new part of my journey with adventures into the unknown, you're about to do the same yourselves. And I guess there is one thought that I would like to leave you with. It's not really advice or a suggestion, but just something to ponder. As you move forward as a congregation, I invite you to remember the spirit of the Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren 17 years ago. I invite you to consider whether this is a time, as it was then, to move beyond the realms of norms and expectations into something new. Is it time to think in new paradigms, to take risk? And instead of asking, why should we do this, to focus on why wouldn't we do this? Might it be a time to, as Alexander Max said, count the cost? But not the cost of challenging traditions and upsetting what's been done and risking new endeavors, but to count the cost of not challenging traditions, not challenging norms that are no longer serving the greater good, to count the cost of not fully empowering amazing, capable leadership to be able to take decisive and timely action, to count the cost of staying with what may become a dysfunctional and perfunctory norm rather than pursuing renewal and transformation into something new, to something better. And this can be a challenge. But as Teddy Roosevelt said, nothing in the world is worth having or worth doing unless it means effort, pain, and is difficult. But friends, as a community, I believe you all can do more than you ever thought you could. That this community is capable of amazing things, keeping God as our vision.